All right, so we're diving into something pretty heavy today. Um, this idea of how narcissistic people can manipulate folks on the autism spectrum. And the specific way we're looking at is triangulation.
Hmm.
And I bet some people hearing that are like, triangulation, what's that? So
Right.
so imagine like you're having a disagreement, right? And the other person just keeps dragging in what someone else he said,
Yeah.
even if that person doesn't really even know what's going on. That's kind of triangulation in a nutshell. But here's the thing, even if you're not autistic yourself, this is useful to know. Like spotting this kind of tactic that can help you in any I relationship where there's manipulation going on.
Absolutely. It's all about creating that doubt.
Yeah.
Like, is it me? Is it them? This third person is saying this.
Yeah.
And when we think about how some autistic people experience the world, you can see why this hits hard.
Yeah, for sure. So you gave us a whole bunch of stuff to go through, articles, some blog posts where people shared their stories,
Mm.
even some guides, right?
Yeah.
You've obviously been doing your homework on this, so we're going to make sense of it all together. But first, just level set, right? Like for someone who's maybe not super familiar, what are the key things to know about the autism spectrum itself?
Okay, so huge thing to remember. Autism isn't one thing. It's a spectrum, right? Like
Yeah.
all these neurodevelopmental differences. And what matters for our topic today is communication, how people interact socially. That's experienced differently depending where you are on that spectrum.
Yeah.
So some people interpreting social cues, those unwritten rules, it's harder. Yeah.
And that's what I was picking up from these sources, right? Like that difficulty, that's what folks with narcissistic tendencies, they can kind of latch onto that. Almost like the communication styles are mismatched. So that opens the door for the manipulation.
That's really good, yeah. And to see how that mismatch gets, uh, you as the deity, we got to talk narcissism. So narcissistic personality disorder, a couple of big things there. Always needing admiration, lacking empathy for others, feeling entitled. And this is important, that tendency to exploit others to get what they want.
Okay, so we've got two very different ways of being in the world, right? On one side, some autistic folks who, might have a harder time with all the social stuff. And on the other side, these narcissistic people who are like weaponizing that very stuff for their own gain. Sounds like a recipe for trouble, doesn't it?
It can be, yeah, which is why we got to understand it. Because when a narcissist uses this triangulation against someone on the spectrum, that can be really effective.
So how does that actually, in real life, can you give us some examples from what you read?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So one blog post you gave me, an autistic person was dating a narcissist, right? Every time they disagreed, the narcissist would bring up what their friends supposedly thought, even twisting their words so it seemed like they were all against the partner.
Wow.
It left them feeling just lost, confused, alone, and like doubting themselves.
Man, that's rough. Sounds super manipulative. And from what I read, this isn't just romantic relationships either. This can happen anywhere.
Oh, totally. One article talked about parents,
Yeah.
like a narcissistic parent will use this to turn siblings against an autistic kid, breaks down the family, makes the kid feel like they don't belong,
Mm.
or at work, right? A narcissistic coworker could use triangulation to wreck someone's reputation,
Yeah.
spreading rumors, twisting what they said so they look bad.
So it's like they're taking other people's opinions, how other people see things, and making that into a weapon, basically.
Exactly. It's about control, avoiding any blame. And for someone who's already, maybe struggling with the social stuff, it can really mess you up.
Yeah. This is some intense stuff. We've got a lot more to dig into, though, like how to spot this, how to fight back. I'm really curious what these sources had to say about protecting yourself.
Reading through all this, one thing that really jumped out was self-care.
Oh, interesting.
Because think about it, this whole triangulation thing, it works by making you doubt yourself.
Yeah.
Right? Makes you anxious, insecure.
Right.
So taking care of your well-being, that's huge EE. Like exercise, meditation, time in nature, whatever brings you joy.
Yeah, like putting on your own oxygen mask first, right?
Exactly. If you're already drained, it's way harder to think straight, to see the manipulation.
You just get swept up in it.
Yeah, one guide even suggested keeping a joy journal. Write down stuff that lifts your mood.
I like that.
Might seem simple,
Yeah.
but it can really help build up that resilience.
Makes sense. So what about boundaries? That seems super important, especially, for folks on the spectrum who might have a harder time speaking up for themselves.
Oh, boundaries are key, but it's like they can feel so foreign at first,
Yeah.
Saying no, putting your needs first, seeing when someone's crossing a line. Not always easy, especially with a narcissist.
It's like you gotta practice it, right? Like learning a new dance or something?
Yes. And one article talked about practicing in safe spaces,
Oh, okay.
like role-playing tough conversations, maybe with a therapist or a friend you really trust. So when it happens for real, you've already kind of rehearsed it.
Smart. Like a dress rehearsal.
Exactly. And speaking of practical stuff, documentation. Several sources were big on this.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense.
Keep records, like interactions, emails, texts, anything that shows the pattern of what's happening.
So you can see it clearly.
Yeah, especially if they're gaslighting you, making you think you're the crazy one.
It's like having a map so you don't get lost in all the fog.
Exactly. Plus, if you ever need help, like from someone else or even legally, you've got proof.
Makes sense. So what about confronting the narcissist directly? Good idea, bad idea?
Ooh, that's tough. Depends on the situation, the specific person.
Yeah.
Sometimes you have to address it, like if it's about safety or well-being.
But it sounds like you got to be strategic and have support.
For sure. One guide said to practice what you'll say, maybe even write it down, and have someone there for you, before and before and after.
So you're not alone in it.
Right. And focus on your experience, your needs. Don't try to change them.
So that's probably not going to work.
Yeah. It's about protecting yourself, setting those boundaries.
Speaking of, we've talked self-care, boundaries, but the sources also mentioned autistic burnout.
Oh, yeah.
Can you explain that and how it connects to all this manipulation stuff?
So autistic burnout, it's basically complete exhaustion, mentally and physically.
Okay.
It happens when you're masking for too long, hiding your autistic traits to fit in.
Right.
Now imagine you're also dealing with manipulation, constantly trying to figure out this narcissist.
Oh, that's got to be draining.
It makes you mask more, so you burn out faster.
It's like running a marathon with weights strapped to you, right? Eventually, you just can't anymore.
Exactly. And when you hit that wall, that's when the narcissist can really take advantage.
So knowing the signs is super important.
Yeah, things like more anxiety, not wanting to be social, sensory overload, trouble focusing, those are red flags.
So you got to listen to your body.
Yeah, rest, reduce stress, get support. Sometimes you got to get OUT of that environment completely.
Wow. Yeah. If you can, of course.
It's tough, but you deserve relationships that are good for you. Supportive, respectful, genuine.
And one thing that came up a lot was the power of finding your people.
Oh, the community aspect.
Yeah, so many stories talked about how important it is to connect with other autistic folks, People who get it, who can support you, validate your experience, where you don't have to mask.
It's huge for healing, especially after all that manipulation, feeling alone.
Like finding your tribe, right?
Right.
Where you can finally be yourself.
And that gives you strength for future relationships, too. But besides connecting, were there any other strategies for handling these tough situations? I mean, one that stood out to me was self-advocacy.
Self-advocacy. Yeah, that's powerful. But what's that actually look like, Especially for someone on the spectrum.
So we've talked about getting support, right? But at the end of the day, your voice, that's the strongest tool. Learning to say what you need, where your limits are, and standing up for yourself, that's essential.
Like knowing your worth, not letting them silence you or control you.
Exactly. And, for some autistic people, that can be extra hard.
Yeah, because communicating needs and boundaries, that's tough for anyone, right?
For sure.
Yeah.
But when you're already dealing with social stuff, communication differences, it can feel impossible.
So any advice from the sources on how to, actually build those skills?
A lot of them said practice being assertive, but in safe places.
Okay.
Like role-playing with a therapist or that trusted friend.
Right.
Joining online groups, sharing your story, getting support. Even journaling can help. See your progress, what your triggers are.
It's like working a muscle. Right. Start small, then you get stronger.
Exactly. Once you find your voice in those safe spots, it's easier to use it when things get tough.
Makes sense. And it's not about, being aggressive or picking fights, right?
No. It's being clear, respectful about what you need, what you won't accept. Setting those boundaries we talked about and sticking to them.
And sometimes that might even mean getting professional help, right? Like if it's too much, the manipulation's messing with your mental health.
Absolutely. If you're feeling overwhelmed or unsure, a therapist specializing in autism and narcissistic abuse, they can help.
Because you don't have to deal with this alone.
Exactly. There are people who get it, who can help you find your voice and take back your power.
And that brings us back to awareness, right? Like we've been saying, knowing how this triangulation works, Seeing the narcissist's tricks, having ways to protect yourself, to advocate for yourself. That's how we empower ourselves and each other.
It's like shining a light, right? You see the manipulation for what it is,
Yeah.
and then you can break free.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. One thing that really stuck with me is, how different everyone on the spectrum is.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
They're not all going to experience this or react to it the same way.
That's so important. We can't assume or generalize. We got to listen, believe autistic people when they tell us what's going on.
Couldn't agree more. So, something for our listener to think about as we wrap up. Have you ever been around someone who uses triangulation? Now that you know about it, how can you protect yourself better?
Knowledge is power.
Yes, it really is. And by having these conversations, by talking about the tough stuff, we make the world a little safer, a little kinder. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We've got tons of resources in the show notes if you want to learn more. Stay curious and keep diving deep.